In the song Hungersite by Goose, the jam section is really only two chords. It's an F to an E flat. Now, if you've watched the Mixolydian lesson, then you probably know that this kind of would immediately mean that you can play in the Mixolydian, because you have one sort of like home chord, and that next chord below it is a major chord and can be considered sort of like the flat 7 chord in that key, if you're assuming that we're an F. So what I'm going to show you in this lesson is Trey Anastasio's solo from Hungersite at Radio City Music Hall when he played with them. What was the tour called? Whatever. It was when Tab played with Goose for a few nights. But this solo is, I think, one especially to highlight because it's just so perfect for identifying that Mixolydian note when you have a proper progression for it. So you'll notice that throughout the solo, some of the lines are a bit repetitive, but there are still some things within it that are worth noting. I post weekly lessons like this one in my online course called Tuff.Club. It covers everything from jam band techniques to full song breakdowns. Now, if you want to go deeper and access exclusive content, the course might be exactly what you're looking for. If you want more hands-on teaching, opt for the weekly mentor or private coaching plans by clicking the link in the description. If you're confident in your own self-exploration, you can access it for just $25 a month. I look forward to seeing you in there. So if you want to be able to watch the whole solo, just click on the tabs in the lesson materials and it'll bring you right to it. You can watch it with the music and with the tabs. Then you can come back to this and watch for the one line at a time analysis. So this is the first line. Right off the bat, the bending is definitely a very prominent thing. So if you're thinking about being an F Mixolydian, here's sort of the related Mixolydian scale. And if you're confused about that, go to the Mixolydian lesson. That should clear everything up. But he's starting right here, bending this note up to the 3rd in the key of F. Now, the next notable note is this one right here, which is the 16th fret of the B string. That is the Mixolydian note. It's the same as playing this. Right? So right as the chords change to that E flat, he's hitting that Mixolydian note to sort of reinforce it, right? Now, the only other thing to note on this first line is the pre-bend. And I've talked about pre-bends in lessons before, especially with Trey's playing, but throughout this whole solo, it's something that is very prominent and a really cool thing to replicate. So anytime I point out that there's a pre-bend, when you go to your practicing, really focus on getting that sound, right, where you're just coming from the top of the bend and coming back down. Here's the second line. Now, at the very end of this line, you got 2 pre-bends coming back into this sort of F Mixolydian position. If you were thinking about the major scale, it'd be like the G shape of the F major major scale, but changing to the Mixolydian. Only really notable thing here is the continued pre-bends and that he's moving back into the original position. But other than that, it's more of the same. Bending, pre-bends, and sort of navigating around from that Mixolydian, going back into that one chord being the F. Here's the next line. So the first measure in this line is really interesting. Right, so he's sort of working his way up to that 4th note in the scale. And this note, that 4th note in the scale agrees with that Mixolydian chord as well. Like the flat 7 chord that's making this the Mixolydian. But in this case, that flat 7 chord isn't in yet. So it's sort of creating some tension for then to sort of release at that chord, which happens at the end of this line when he hits that Mixolydian note again. So for focusing on this line specifically, I would direct most of your attention toward the first measure just because this line is so cool. Other than that, he's still following the Mixolydian toward the end of the phrase. For the next line, pretty simple, just walking down from the Mixolydian note, down all the way to the third note in F. Right, you got Mixolydian, 6, 5, 4, 3. Then just some more pre-bends on the 12th fret of the G string. For the next line, the only thing that I think is worth mentioning here is that he's targeting the Mixolydian note in a new spot. So this is a really important thing for becoming really comfortable with slightly altering a scale to play a mode like the Mixolydian, where all of a sudden you're playing flat 7s instead of major 7. In this case, it's helpful because he's playing the flat 7 on the 8th fret of the G string here. So he's going from the 1 to what would have been the major 7 to the flat 7. And then at the very end of this, he's hitting that 11th fret, which again I said was the 4 and agrees with that Mixolydian chord. Now for the next line. Pretty simple, doing the same exact thing as 2 lines ago, where he's walking down and then doing a little bend on the 12th fret. Then at the end of this line, he's again hitting that 4th note in the scale. I think by now you can probably tell why I initially said that this is a repetitive solo, because at a certain point, there's not really too much to talk about with each of these lines, but still really important to be able to learn the whole thing, because there are some complexities within each of these that you can't just learn the first line and assume you have the rest of it. And it's also important to think about these chord tones too, as it's switching back and forth between that Mixolydian chord and the 1. Now for the last line. So all he's doing here is moving out of this major scale and sort of getting into like the A-shaped major scale in F. He actually doesn't play a Mixolydian note toward the end of this. He's just kind of moving into this position. Right, coming from the A-shaped scale. And, playing a descending line, like going from the 4th note in the scale down to the 1. So as always with lessons like this, the practice routine will be to go to the tabs, learn the solo 1 line at a time. Keep in mind everything that I've said about the chord tones and switching to address that flat 7 chord, but also the pre-bends and finding that Mixolydian note, the flat 7, in a few different spots across the neck. Once you've done that, try to get it up to 100% speed, and then you can play it along with the backing track that I've provided. It's in a different key, very slightly. It's a half step down, so it's in the key of E. So I'm alternating between an E chord and a D chord rather than an F and an E flat. So just play over that, try to add some of the phrases from this solo and some of your own, and then if you want to, you can make a 60-second solo of your own using that backing track. That's sort of like the extra credit part of this. So if you have any questions, let me know. But otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.